Hello, I'm James, and welcome to another Jonesing for Film theatrical review. Yes, Rock of Ages, the latest musical blockbuster. So in Rock of Ages, we follow a slew of characters, mainly focusing on Sherry, a small-town girl who moves to Hollywood to live her dream of being a singer. Once there, she meets a barback named Drew, and the two hit it off. Amongst their story, we also focus on a bar in fear of being shut down, a Bible-thumping woman who means to clean the streets of rock and roll, starting with the bar, and the biggest rock star who has more to him than people think, who could be the only thing that saves the bar. So yeah, it's the love story and it's the save the bar story. Now, I'm not a huge fan of musicals. I'll watch them, but I don't typically stand in line for them. But the moment I heard about this film, I really wanted to see it. Why? Two reasons. One, the soundtrack involved, and two, Tom Cruise as the big-time rock star. So let's start with the acting. The acting is surprisingly good here. The two leads are pretty much nobodies. But despite this fact, Julianne Hough and Diego Boneta give really great performances. The next great pairing here is Alec Baldwin and Russell Brand. These two guys had excellent comedic timing and they worked great together. Catherine Zeta-Jones was extremely entertaining as the Bible thumper. She had some great lines of her own. And of course we have Tom Cruise as Stacey Jacks, the rock star, and he gave the best performance in the entire film despite having such a small role. But in a film like this, you can't just act well. You have to be able to sing. And everyone here sang just as well as they're acting. I will say there were a couple of people that weren't so great at singing, but they weren't given a whole lot to work with, so I'm not really gonna harp on it too much. I was particularly blown away by Cruise's performance here. This guy has an amazing singing voice, and from what I've heard, he spent like 5 hours a day training, and that definitely paid off for him. I think another factor that helps is that he got Axl Rose's vocal coach to help him. And the songs that are sung are some of the greatest rock songs from the 80s. I mean, we got a killer soundtrack here. Wanted Dead or Alive, Hit Me With Your Best Shot, I Wanna Rock, and that's just naming a couple songs. And I love how some of these songs are blended in with each other. I have to admit, I never thought mixing I Love Rock and Roll and Jukebox Hero would actually work, but they do it seamlessly. And all the songs are so exhilarating. I found it extremely hard to keep myself in my seat. I just wanted to jump up and start headbanging and playing air guitar. And yeah, I know I would have looked like a dork, but it would have been so worth it. Luckily, the choreography was really good, so I knew me getting up was completely unnecessary. If the choreography was a little off, then I wouldn't have felt like such a dork if I did it. Another thing that worked about this film was the humor. There was a surprising number of jokes that actually worked. There were a couple that didn't work, but the ones that did certainly made up for them. However, there are a few things that did not work for me. First off, the story is extremely cliched. This is something I expected going in, but I still find it a tiny problem. It's very predictable, and even though I did know it was going to happen, it still lost a little bit for me. I wasn't too involved with the story because I knew how things were going to play out. My next problem with the film were certain traits or actions that some of the characters have or didn't do anything to forward the story. They were just there. Without spoiling too much, there's a character who's having an affair and nothing's ever done with it. It was completely unnecessary and a complete waste of time. And there are a few other things like that happen. And if it was just the one thing, it wouldn't be as big a deal to me. But the film is riddled with pointless traits and events. And there are some things that's like, to mix in with the song that's playing, they throw a character in to sing one of the verses, but they never explain why that character's singing a sad song, except for like one line where they mention something, but they never really dive into it, and that really bugged me. And this slows the pace of the film. The film is just over 2 hours, but it feels so much longer. And I think part of this also goes back to the predictable story. You can see how things are going to turn out, but they drag out everything to the point where it's like, okay, let's just move on with the story. We know how it's going to turn out. Now, this last point does not affect my final verdict. It's not something that I personally get offended at, but I know there are some people who do, who would it would lower their final verdict. And that point is, this film has a fairly high level of sexuality in it. It's a PG-13 movie, so there's no nudity, but it's not light stuff either. So if you're easily offended by sexuality, you may want to stay clear of it. Like I said, it's not something that I personally get offended about, but I don't want people to look at my final verdict and go, hey, that sounds like something I want to see, and find out that it's got a bunch of stuff that offends them. So, fair warning. So, on that note, my final verdict of Rock of Ages is an excellent. Despite the issues that I do have, I still found the movie to be very entertaining. The soundtrack alone moves the film into the good verdict, but the humor, the acting, decent singing, and the overall vibe lift that a couple extra notches. So that's my review of Rock of Ages. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe. Also, don't forget to visit me on Facebook and check out my blog. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next review.